Intro chat with Merrill's live, digging deep where techs thrive. From the latest hacks to cool updates, join the ride, don't be late.
Hey folks, welcome to another awesome episode of Entra Chat, and I have a really special guest here today, Jef Kazimer. He's part of my team. We did some of these earlier Twitter spaces and all of that, so many folks would know you from there and from even before. Jef, do you want to just give us a quick intro about yourself, and then we'll dig into how you came into Microsoft and your journey here?
Sure. So Merrill, first of all, thanks for inviting me. And yeah, we've done a lot of these events on Twitter, Spaces, even some of our official ones. So it's great to, meet you again in this sort of space.
Yes.
So like Merrill said, I'm a product manager in the same team as Merrill. I'm a principal product manager with a focus on the best technology, and that is identity governance.
Yes. Awesome. We have so many different products now, right? It's hard to keep up or keep on top of all the product services that we have and the new ones that are coming out with AI. I just had our first AI chat last week. So it's all happening in Entra.
We're going to need AI to understand all the Entra features for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, true. So Jef, tell us about your career, like just your history, what things you started on, what technologies, and how you came to be at Microsoft.
Well, if we go back to the beginning, the very beginning, some of my first technology was probably Atari 2600, right? So I grew up, exactly. Yeah. So I was very fortunate that my father was the traditional hacker, right? Always
Nice.
curious and into technology. His day job was insurance, but I think his passion was, technology. And, growing up, he had an Atari 2600. I played video games, and I remember the day we went to a store called Service Merchandise where you actually had to go and order a computer. And the first computer we had was an Atari XL, right? So this was, Atari 400. And, that began my journey into understanding what computers were at a young age. And my dad being a technologist, like my friends would have video game consoles outside the Atari. And my father would be like, if you want to play games, you're going to code games. So he taught me how to program and source code and all that. So it was an early introduction to technology for me.
So the Atari console, the gaming console, is the one with that stick, right?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and you had like the very basic games. You could move the ball around.
Yeah, it was
paddle.
a single stick, like a membrane and one button, and then it had a sort of like a dial controller for Pong. So that was very cutting edge back then.
That for me was my first intro. I never owned one, but one of my cousin's friends had one, so we would just play when I visited his house back in Sri Lanka. But yeah,
it's old.
Good memories and those cartridges.
And I remember like the time when we had to load programs from audio tapes, right? So we had this audio tape where if you wanted to play a game, you would start the tape loading, but if you moved or disturbed it, it would just stop. So you had to wait, and it was very frustrating. So it taught me patience as a kid.
Yes, that's you need a lot of that with all the vibe coding and stuff.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's setting me up for success today
for the AI world.
Exactly. But going forward, like I got into computers, and I remember the first time I used a modem, the first time I connected to a bulletin board system. So this was, in my late teens in high school, and I was in as a computer hobbyist. And when it was time to actually decide what did I want to do with my life and career, I decided, well, I enjoy computers. Why would I ever work for that? I decided to go into radio broadcasting, right?
Nice.
And, that was probably not the most forward thinking. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but fortunately, I came to my senses and I realized that that was not a career for me. I was working in technology. I was a retail technician for a while, and then I progressed into different roles.
Nice. And how did you fall into the identity side of things?
Great question. So I was doing help desk support, right, for a company, actually building a help desk, running a help desk. And they were at the time, it was Windows NT 3.51. I was learning about that. Novell was something that was out there. I became
Yes.
Novell certified. So I knew
Nice.
the concept of,
The
authentication,
directory.
exactly. And then started working in that area where it just became something that I was, drawn to and I was, most intrigued with. And just sort of learned and built from there by working in different areas and growing that skill set.
Nice, nice. And how's your story of like how did you end up at Microsoft?
Great question there too. So, when I was working for a very large German company for, and on the East Coast, and we were very much learning to be a Microsoft shop. And it was one of the first times we actually were invited. So as you know, Microsoft really loves customers. Well, they invited my company was to come
Right.
and do what's called the JDP program, Joint Development Program back then. And we
Right.
were learning about this new thing called Active Directory. Right. And so I had gone out to Redmond for a symposium. And during that symposium, to learn about Active Directory, they asked some customers to stick around in this JDP program. And I actually got to work with Microsoft and I was hooked, right? This was like, I felt like this is where I wanted to be and this is exciting. And I would spend many years trying to get back to that. So I'd worked, in another large company where I started building out their directory services. And then I learned about this thing called Microsoft Identity, MIS, right? Like, what is this?
Yes.
And, slowly but surely, it was pulling me into identity, even though I wasn't going in that direction. And then finally, I had, I learned a little bit about that product. And when I say that I think we deployed some of the most extensive and complex FIM, MIM solutions there were, it actually was where the MIM wall was created, was when I was working at the company. And I decided it was time for me to maybe leave the enterprise space as a customer and decided I wanted to work for technology companies. So I joined Microsoft as a consultant deploying identity solutions.
Nice, nice. So MIM is your, you know it like the back of your hand. Used to.
I wouldn't admit it in public, but yes, I know a thing or two about it. It's great that I've transitioned to the engineering side, right? The product side, where I get to work on advancing that product. But now as we move beyond the on-prem world to the cloud world, we're taking it to the next generation. So I love being able to be a part of that.
Nice, nice. And yeah, so in our team, we have folks specializing in various areas. So as from the customer experience team, because Entra is so big, we have different specializations, and you lead the BU team for governance. Identity governance is one of the many things you do. So tell us how you sort of came in to take over that role.
Sure. Well, because, the experience of IGA can be very specialized, but what's great about IGA is every organization needs it, right? And we think about it like access management, the pure basics of we know what authentication is, we know who that person is, but what access they have or should have is something every organization does. But when you start doing it at scale, that's where it becomes a problem. In the olden days, when we would do things at small, I have a ticket, I have a phone call, it's manageable, but being able to scale this is a challenge. So we did this in the MIM product space, but as we went to the cloud, that surface area where access is, whether it's on-prem, the cloud, your data center, third parties, it's much harder to get a control of. So we're looking at our products, we built them into Entra, and then as we launched the advanced capabilities in Entra ID Governance, I was thrilled to be a part of launching that.
Nice, nice. And Microsoft didn't just take MIM and make it the cloud version of that, right?
That's a great question. So MIM actually is a very widely deployed product. It solves a lot of identity problems for traditional scenarios. But as organizations move from on-prem to hybrid to cloud, maybe MIM is not the best solution for that because it's very different protocols. We're no longer having those on-premises LDAP, SQL connections, right? We've moved to more federated, REST-based, API, and that's where Entra really started to become where everybody's going to and utilizing these. So we've looked at not just how do we govern where customers are, but where are they moving to so they actually have a secure place to move and secure their business on. So that's where Entra really is that burgeoning area for governance, in my opinion.
Nice, nice. So give us a sort of a lay of the land. Like what is identity governance for someone who's not really known about this, right? Let's say you're just a small business, your business is growing and you just created users in your system as you hired new people. And what is identity governance and why should they worry about that?
So one story that we think resonates with customers of all sizes and scales is what we call the lifecycle journey, right? Every organization has that joining event. So as an employee, I'm joining that organization. I'm starting, whether it's through HR or I just walked in off the street, there's some process to identify who that person is and then figure out what their role is in the organization, whether you are working in a business that is knowledge worker or you're a retail worker who's working at a kiosk, right? We kind of know what the intent of why we're hiring you. But it can also be who we're partnering with, right? We're no longer just this world of we have employees. We've become more connected where we have external people we collaborate with or bring into our organization. So we see this as the beginning of the life cycle, the join or that event. And most organizations of all sizes have some authoritative data source, right? Typically, the larger will be HR systems. But with the rise of SaaS HR, most organizations have really gravitated to things like Workday or Bamboo, right? These are managing that employee lifecycle. Well, that's great data to feed into the IT lifecycle. So getting that data as authoritative sources into the IT process, that's really where it begins, right? We know the people, we know their role, and now we can actually automate at things about access, right? So I know you're coming in, I could determine things about your metadata, your role, your department, and now I could say, these are the resources you need to do your job function. And utilizing things like Entra ID Governance, we can automate those assignments. I don't have to have admins go in there and do these one by one. I can automate it, make sure it's repeatable, but also reportable, right? Why did they get this access? Oh, it's because of the data and how long they should have it. Well, there's policies around that, not manual actions that we may forget to do or not do correctly. But then, as we progress, like we all know, access we think we need is not the only thing we need, right? And that's why we've extended things to like self-service, right? The ability for employees not to need to call the admin, but to actually be able to do it themselves. Go in there and make requests and have policies say who has to approve, how long. So we're reducing that admin overhead. And that's where I see a lot of efficiencies come, right? So whether you're a smaller organization who's wearing many hats, you're reducing the need of manual actions. But then as we go further into that life cycle, the type of access we have, we all know of admin access, right? The infrastructure admin, the server admin, but the business has privileged access too. We can manage that as well in Entra.
Absolutely. And there are so many horror stories you can talk about when this thing goes wrong, right? Because whether you want it or not, you are sort of doing identity governance. You're creating a new user when they join. Maybe when they leave, you're removing their identity. But if you don't do these things, then I know of various stories where someone just pinged me the other day saying, oh, this person left the company, but he was still posting on the internal chats and sending emails, and we don't want that to happen. And they were having all this escalation of trying to sort of fix that issue with the VP up, down, really focused on it. And yes, that's the thing, right? You have to do it, but it's already happening, even if you want it or not. So it's how well do you do it in the organization?
Exactly. It's you're going to need to do it at some point. So do it correctly, do it in a way that's scalable and manageable, right? And manual activities typically is not, right? You can have SOPs, a list of things to do, but humans make mistakes, right? The other aspect we see, though, is not just the security aspect, which is huge, but there's a lot of recouping cost, right? Because a lot of times users get provisioned into third-party SaaS apps that license based on the users in the app, right? So having the ability to say this user doesn't need access to these tools anymore and be able to automatically deprovision that, right, reduces those licensing needs across those services. And that's where you're managing that lifecycle from the beginning, the assignment, and then making sure when is it appropriate, having somebody to say this access should persist. Maybe that person changes roles over their lifetime. We don't want them to have the same access for 10 years because they're probably not doing the same thing for those 10 years. So
licensing, is a really good thing, right? Like that's something where it can itself pay for the product for you to manage the users. Because I know so many you don't even need to go to the third party apps. Even Microsoft licensing, sometimes people have more licenses than they need, and the identities are still living when the person is no longer there in the organization and consuming those licenses, or maybe they're not using it anymore, and
Exactly.
you are giving them like maybe all of E5 when they're not really using that. They've changed roles, etc. If you're a large enterprise, you might have different tiers of licensing, right? Like an E5, and for frontline workers, you might have a different license. That itself is another area that you could optimize.
And you bring up a good point. One of the big benefits of moving the management of access to Entra is many organizations have moved the authentication to Entra already. We've moved from the world of on-prem to hybrid, where now we're plugging our apps directly in for authentication. And that's usage, right? Signing into an app, I'm utilizing some need to access it. Well, that's signal. And if we could utilize that signal from our authentication to drive our authorization or access management decisions, now we can make better decisions. Is Brian using the app? Well, he hasn't signed in over 30 days.
Right.
So that can
Yes.
guide other things.
Yeah.
And this is a differentiator to me from the traditional IGA tools. These are tools that sit on the side and they're sort of trying to manage multiple systems. They don't necessarily have the same sort of signal or activity to drive some of those. That's why I like bringing the authentication and authorization to that common control plane.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I love about Entra. I love the space because Entra is very unique. It does everything, and all these signals all integrated in one system, right? And you can do all these fancy things. You're just working with one set of tools to bring that to a reality.
And one thing that I think struggle with traditional IGA tools is customization, right? And most IGA platforms have some level of development where I can develop custom rules or connectors or workflows. Now, coming in from a consultant, I can tell you it was a very active part of my career
Yes.
where I was building custom solutions because those were the custom requirements. But now, as I move from the product side, I do see some of the challenges where customers who had, invested in custom solutions can't always support them long term. The person who customized it is
Yeah.
long gone. They're afraid to
Yes.
change the
Yeah.
code. And that's where I think we have a differentiator as well. So as customers have moved to the Entra platform, we reuse technologies, right, to solve problems. In this example,
Yes.
our extensibility is built on Azure Logic Apps for workflows, not a bespoke workflow language, not some custom scripted language that is specific to some other product, right? That is only a small set of people have knowledge or skill sets on. So we want to enable those organizations to do governance that is, pervasive, but also supportable in the long run.
Yes, with lifecycle workflow, it's a good example. It runs in the cloud. There are no servers. Like I had an IntraChat episode some time ago, and yeah, he was talking about all how they've deployed, and they just use lifecycle workflows for everything that they do. Yeah, so this is a good example for me of the cloud thing and sort of Microsoft's approach when it comes to bringing things to the cloud. It's not like shift lifting and bringing all the features with the tick box of
Yes.
all the feature when you compare, because when people are comparing products, they just go through a feature comparison at the beginning, and Microsoft doesn't do that. My experience has been like I came from the SharePoint world, and the amount of the millions of dollars that large enterprises would spend because they wanted to customize the branding on the SharePoint page, right? The logos and all of that when it was on-prem SharePoint. And, I made a living out of it, but every 2 years I would upgrade servers, and that was all I did, because it was like you would have a SharePoint farm with 3, 4, 5 servers, and it was a project in itself to upgrade and make sure all the customizations you did continue to work. And the business was not really getting any value out of all of that work. Zero, right? They just were like, oh, we need our brand, we need our logo, and we need things to look the same. Now, like with SharePoint Online, Microsoft said, no, you're not getting all of that. We want it to be a platform to do productive work. And people are happy. Like no one complained. People complained at the beginning, but no one noticed. Like you went to SharePoint Online, everything just worked, and it was better now. It kept updating automatically, and things were much better. And you didn't have to spend that whole bunch of money on upgrading and fixing and upgrading servers, patching servers, backing them up, all of that. Um, and I feel identity governance and those are very similar, right? Like Microsoft tries to make it really simple and ease of use for experience and not allow you to do a lot of customizations. A lot of the time, I see this need to do customizations when it's not really the core of what the business is. It's just that when you have access to these, you sort of say, okay, I want to tweak this to the maximum and like just do it to the exact specific way that I want. But it becomes a nightmare to maintain over.
Yeah, it is an albatross. Like I speak to customers now who've built these custom behemoth kind of solutions, and it may meet the requirements, but now they're stuck. And they tell me that they can't move off because they don't know everything that's customized and what really has to come. And this is where we want to enable these secure solutions. But I often tell customers, we may not do like the spreadsheet example. You may say, I want to do A, B, and C. And I may say, well, I don't do B, but I solve that problem in a different way. And I think a great example of this is, password synchronization. 20 years ago, everybody did password synchronization. You have to get connectors and synchronized passwords because we had isolated identities across different
Right.
islands of systems. Well, we moved to the cloud, we federated, we understand the benefits of a central single sign-on. But now as organizations say, well, I still have passwords even though I do SSO. Well, we've actually moved the password list now. So if you look at,
Yes. Yeah.
syncing passwords, we no longer really want to do that. We want to enable customers to start out passwordless day one, even day zero, right before they even
Yes.
start the
Yes.
organization.
Yeah.
And I think LCW, like being able to issue that temporary access pass as a pre-hire, just with a little configuration of a workflow, not having to
Yes.
deploy all this, that you're starting up a business in a better way that's more secure, and the user experience is so much better than trying to stick to the passwords we've always done.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't need to bring everything that you did before. Here, it's a time to rethink a lot of it, right? Like from the passwordless experience to getting access to the apps, and all those things firing off on the server side. So that's a neat thing. And like my experience has been, I know one big customer in Australia, like they've done all this and they're like, we can't now make any changes in their
Yeah.
current IGA solution because it's so complex. When they try to do some change, it breaks a lot of things. They need like 6 months to make small tweaks in how their organization works. It's again because of this, right? You've done all these customizations, and now you can only move really slowly. And they're like, "Yeah, we want to move away from this and make as little customizations." Like I feel they've been enlightened. They're like, we want to make as little customizations, and we want to like not be the business of managing this platform. We want to like run our business instead.
And one thing I would caution though is we may think this is a big company problem, right? Customization and support of it, but I could assure you it's not, right? Because I think you more than anybody knows the benefits and power of scripting, right? Admins love to
Yes.
script, right?
Yeah.
If I could write code, I can automate a lot of things. But what challenges become is that how do you support that as people change roles and move
Yes.
around? How do you make tweaks and changes if you don't understand what the original intent of that was? And a great example, I actually was at a customer once. When I was a consultant, and there was a whole big concern in there was a war room going on, and it was
Right.
because a lot of things stopped working and nobody knew why, right? Finance couldn't get access to things, they couldn't generate reports, and this whole big thing. Well, it turned out they actually had things automated through years using a combination of scripts, but that person unfortunately left the organization. And when they actually removed their home share, their home drive,
Right.
all those scripts stopped working.
Wow.
Right. And I remember they actually called me into this war room, right? Because they knew I was an identity consultant. And they said, Jeff, can you help us? We restored the home drive, but we have no idea what these scripts are. We need to get this back and running. And I was like, I can't help you. I have no idea what this is. I think you're gonna need some specialized knowledge here. And
Yes.
my point is by bringing things to a platform like Entra, like being able to automate through configuration, but being able to extend in a framework that is supportable, that is where you start getting that agility to and not only react to the business, but to enhance the business, to be able to get to work faster and more secure.
Yeah, that's what I really like about like the low code, no code. And yeah, we'll talk about how all of that's evolving in the new
Exactly.
world, right? What are the common challenges you encounter when you're helping large organizations with like the identity governance solutions?
Sure. So remember how I said the life cycle begins with HR, right? So it's very common organizations, they have these directories, AD, very common, of users they've had for years, right? And now we've basically said, hey, you have these HR data, let's connect them together. So going through this process of getting that authoritative data and enabling automated provisioning. Now you have what they call it the brownfield environment, right? Your users already exist, but now you've got data, authoritative data, and you've got rules or transformations that say take the data here and then have processes that kick off when somebody leaves HR, go and terminate the accounts. Well, if somebody's been doing manual processes for 20 years, they've been using service tickets, maybe they've missed a few things. Maybe they've, didn't let people
Yes.
go they should have. And all of a sudden, automation's going to do what you tell it to do. So having this process of getting that data, looking at the logic and enabling that HR data is usually a first step. And that can take a while, right? Because it's usually a combination of IT, HR, but also that review and comfort to say, hey, this data is correct. HR did not make a mistake. We're going to update all of our users, and that's going to drive our later access decisions. So starting there, getting that buy-in across those teams and getting review and planning that out usually is the hardest first step.
Nice, nice. So what are some of the success, like give an example of a customer that went through this, deployed ID governance, and how it's changed for them, like any success stories that you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's very common where an organization has that manual tasks, right? So now with the automation of HR, they can automate those admins who are getting these phone calls and tickets to react to these kind of events, right? So they're not just having to respond, so they're finding time to do more things where they didn't have to before. But then there's also the shift, right? They have traditional tools that they bought years ago that probably may no longer be supported, or they were customized and they can't change them anymore. So they've moved to these platforms and they're able to actually deprecate that older technology and move towards this platform that they can support. And that again frees them up from supporting older technologies to doing more things like deploying passwordless, a
Yes.
focus on zero trust. So when you have a small admin team, right, by getting those efficiencies through automation and governance, handling things that you can automate, and being able to delegate to the right people, you're bringing up more ability to deploy more technology solutions.
Nice. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like frees up people
Yeah,
to focus on other things, right? Like then be sort of doing the gardening, the basic things, tending to the VMs, patches, and updates, because the team would still need to maintain all of that when you're hosting them, but even if it's like running as a VM in the cloud,
exactly.
is a thing you need.
And we saw this before. This pattern of moving from on-prem to the cloud. A few years ago, our team was really helping customers modernize from the traditional on-premises identity providers, right? The AVFSs, the third-party IDPs. And as they move those apps, they don't have to support those servers anymore, those configurations. They move to Entra. We're seeing the same thing happening now on the authorization side, right? Those tools they had to maintain and manage, they no longer have to do, and that frees them up to do more advanced things.
Is there a difference in, how you approach identity governance when you're like a large enterprise, you know, 80, 100,000 users compared to a smaller business, maybe 5,000, 10,000 users?
Yeah. So because of an organization's size and scale, you may have different personas who actually have some interest in governance, right? Some organizations, a smaller one may have that admin who's doing sort of admin functionality or IGA functionality, but they also may have some compliance officers, or they may have some regulatory. But then there's larger organizations where the identity admin is a completely separate organization from the IGA organization. So they may have different tooling, different processes, and very little collaboration between them. So working together to understand what the needs of everybody at the organization and the outcome from security, business, applications, right, user experience, that can take time depending on the scale of it. But once you start getting to the actual automation, right, it becomes a lot of rinse and repeat. Once you've done a lot of the automation you can do at 500 users can go to 5,000 and so forth. Now, performance can have some differences in timing, but the process becomes very similar as you be able to do that.
Right. Okay. It's just the number of people that you need to work with differs, right, in the different sizes of the org.
Yeah, and delegation becomes something more, right? So in a smaller organization, you may have the ability for a small admin team to react or respond, but in larger global organizations, different time zones, that's where like the delegation. So like for things like Entra ID governance, we have that centralized HR, centralized automation of assignments, but utilizing things like entitlement management catalogs to delegate who can assign and manage assignments, or approvals, right? Not just the regular business users being able to respond or revoke access without admins. You're now getting that efficiencies the larger you go, but through delegation and automation.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, so I've come across, when I was first introduced, like I was also looking at it like, why are there so many different levels of, the access catalogs and so on? Like if you're a smaller company, you don't really need that. You don't even have that many number of people delegate, and sort of the smaller IT team does a lot of it. But in a large enterprise, you have compliance and risk, and the identity governance, as you said, is different from the team that manages Entra, and there'll be a different team that manages just the Connect Sync service sometimes. So
Exactly.
you need to, like, when you want to do a small change, you'll need to get everyone across the board on the same page to do those.
But also in a larger organization, there's a lot more complexity. So, like as an admin, I don't know all the salespeople and I don't know all the sales tools and applications and the levels of access to do their job, right? Does Brian need access to the sales tool? But does he need access to the super secret sales project? As an admin, I don't know that. But the business likely does have awareness of this. So being able to delegate those business decisions that drive access to the right people to get the right access, that's very important.
Yeah, so I want to come touch on that. Like user experience has been a thing that people have said, like it's very simple to use. It's easy for non-technical people when it comes to Entra's ID governance. That's something I keep hearing over and over again. How is that a focus for the identity governance team, and like how has it shaped the product?
Great question. So the first layer is that automation piece, right? So being able to manage access that either I'm granted initially when I join an organization, and I should step back. We kind of talk about the JML. Maybe I mentioned it earlier, but the join event, the move when I change roles, say from
Yeah.
sales to marketing, or when I leave, right? So when I join, how do I know what access I should have, right? And I just signed my paperwork. I got my first
Yes.
laptop, whatever. Somebody has to tell me what I need access to. So by automating those assignments, we're able to get the people who just got hired to do a job function ready day one, right? No more of this. I mean, back in my day, like you'd have a 2-week window of trying to figure out like, what access you need where you really weren't effective. We could do that
Yes.
pre-hire, day of hire now, so they actually can start. But then how do you guide them to the additional access? And that's where the My Access portal, right? Now, I've deployed enough IGA solutions over my career to tell you every organization calls it My Access. So that's
Yes.
great that we've standardized the My Access portal for Microsoft. But having that one place to go where I can identify the access I might need and be guided to say, hey, maybe you should request access based on your history or your role or those kind of things. That really helps them, zero in on what they have to request to be functional. So now we're able to bring these controls to enable the business and then get out of the way, right? Because we don't really want to make the salesperson, the research person have to be an admin or an IGA mindset, right? We want them to be able to get the right tools to do the job they're hired to do.
Yeah. And what about the user experience side from the end user? And things like you mentioned, delegating the catalog, and even when it comes to doing access reviews, there's a lot that Microsoft does to make it really simple for users. And for me, that's an area where I've seen a lot of asks come to, like, I want to customize all of this. And the Microsoft approach has been, no, let's keep it simple and let's focus on usability.
Sure. So, for an organization, we can delegate to other parts of the organization to assign access and have policies around who has to review the access that's been granted, right? Now, this becomes a responsibility of whoever you've designated. It could be like a resource owner, a group owner, a manager, or a named person, right? So we've built features into our review or attestation to guide the reviewer, because that's so important. We have a policy, we have a control, but if that person isn't responding, or they're just responding with the approve all, which is very common, right? Because they don't know. So they just keep persisting the access because they don't want to remove access if they don't know. So we've given the tools to guide that business user to make a better informed decisions, like things like recommendations of like inactivity, or what we call like group outlier, to help identify things that they really can't see. So we're trying to guide them to enable them to actually respond to that. But one of the things is, you're right, people want to customize the experience for the end users. But one of the challenges that I think we've seen the change moving to cloud from the traditional on-premises world is that we no longer are just thinking about the access for ourselves, but when I collaborate with other organizations, I'm requesting access. I'm reviewing access for other organizations who've granted access to me to collaborate with them. So if we start having a unique experience for every organization, this becomes really overloading for the end user. So by having that common framework of my access, right, or the access reviews, whether it's a guest that I'm reviewing access for, or I'm reviewing access in my own tenant, I have a very consistent user experience.
That's a really good. I never thought of that. Like as you have a guest coming in, it's just natural for them, right? When they see the My Access and they can request an access package in another organization.
Exactly.
It's just the same experience that they know from, and it's sort of a less of a learning curve for them. And they come to know about the access reviews, and those concepts all very familiar to them. I didn't think of that before. That it reduces the sort of the knowledge and the training that you need.
Exactly.
Like, it's how are you going to tell a guest user that they need to go to this system? Like, how would they even know? And having My Access sort of guide them through that flow is
Yeah.
a unique thing.
And think about it, like yes, it's a cloud-based service, so you can have access to it from any organization. You could have conditional access on it, but like your traditional tool, I can't VPN in to go as a guest to come and do attestation of my access, right? So by bringing that to the cloud, right, where I'm authenticating, I'm getting those benefits at scale and global collaboration. But it's also, with that is that familiar experience for the admins and the end users. So again, they want to be able to respond to it, because they know if they don't respond to this access review, I'm going to lose access to that, and I'm not going to be able to do my job function with that relationship. So we feel it helps drive that familiarity to get the actions done.
Nice. Yeah. Just one story I remember, when I worked as a consultant in one org, I needed access to various things, and the admin couldn't figure out what group or where I needed to go to get access. He asked, "Who do you work with?" And I just mentioned another person, and he was like, he ran a script where he just copied all the groups the other person had, and put me in all the groups that the person was in the same group, and now I had access to everything. So
that is probably a very common customer request. The clone user, clone access, right? Make Jef look like Meryl. But you're right. There should never be a blanket, because you don't really know what you're giving access to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
and
say with like entitlement management, you may want to request all the access Meryl has, and if the policy allows it and the approver allows it, but an admin blanket copying a user, that should never be something they do.
It's crazy. But when you're a consultant, you're sort of there,
of course,
and you're trying to help them.
You're meeting the requirements. Yeah.
Yes, I was the consultant who was asked to come in to do work, and I couldn't do my work, and the admin's job was to fix it. And they did whatever they could to fix the issue, right? So
And you're highlighting a very important problem, right? The business wants to do the thing the business does. And now IT and security is trying to implement some kind of controls. And when you block the business, they try to go around it. They try to call in a favor, call in a friend.
yes,
And when the admin who may be feeling the pressure from the business, they're just
Yeah.
going to do it. So that's why
Yeah.
policy-based controls, even though they're an admin, you still have visibility that did they meet the requirements? Were they approved? All these things are very important if you're in any organization who's going to get audited or have compliance requirements to demonstrate the controls you put in place are truly effective.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, that audit capability is key in Entra, right? And it's the other neat thing with Entra is then it's all in one place.
Yes.
The auditing, the access the person got, the entire history of how they got the access, when, who added them, and like who approved them. It's all in that same place, and you can use all of that information.
And I think as customers are learning about, as they move that authentication to the cloud, the authorization, key scenarios like the B2B or external guest scenario and governance is so important. The business is collaborating. You need to have governance around your guests. So I work with a lot of customers who say, we don't use guests. And then I say, well, look at our dashboard, our IJ dashboard, and you see that the business is using guests.
Yes.
And you really should bring controls to them. So that's a great place. If you're just beginning with Entra ID governance, start looking at your external guest scenarios and bring them to be governed. We have great features to take those guests that somebody invited to SharePoint and make them governed and add lifecycle controls. But I think a lot of areas where customers may be very surprised. It's actually very common when I go talk to a customer and they'll say, wow, I did not know Microsoft does all this in governance, right? Because I think they make an assumption that we are a cloud only, and we're not, right? We manage from the cloud, whether the
Yeah.
resources are on Entra, they're in a third-party cloud, or they're on premises, right? So being able to manage access to on-premises resources through things like group write-back, right?
Yeah.
That's huge. It allows these customers to consolidate to have met multiple control planes from on-prem and the cloud, moving it all to that central control plane to the cloud and reach back to manage where they still have access on-prem.
Nice. Now, identity governance is a bit different to sort of the standard Entra single sign-on, which is more like technical, and an admin will work with an app to onboard the app, and single sign-on works, and they're fine. But when it comes to identity governance, it's much more bigger, right? Sort of an organizational sort of thing. So how does Microsoft help companies, get onto ID governance and be successful in deploying identity governance?
So great question. But because we're built on that Entra platform, there's actually a lot of synergy, right? The same application that you're integrating to Entra for SSO, you're creating that relationship to issue a token. But one of the things that you're doing is managing the assignment to the app, right? So I think we have the mode where any user who can authenticate the tenant can get a token for that app. I kind of call it open assignment, right? And we actually don't recommend that you have apps doing that, but it exists. We actually recommend require assignment. So now when a user who was that app who came on board, you enable it for federation for SSO. Now you have an assignment to manage. That's where governance comes in, right? So you're bringing that app, look at how you're managing the assignment. Yes, you could do a direct user assignment to an application. We don't recommend that. And we do support the traditional way of doing group-based assignment. But really the way you want to get to is using governed assignments, using things like access packages, which are much more higher fidelity of here's the resource, the application, and the distinct role, if it supports it, that I'm giving access to. So now when I'm reviewing access or looking at what access a person has, I know they have sales admin versus just reader, right? It's not just a group, it's some obscure group name that I really don't know what it does in the application. So making that part of your business process for onboarding resources, but as you're migrating those apps and resources to Entra, think of governance and access management and utilize those capabilities, and it becomes repeatable. It's just another step that you have to do to secure the application with governance. And I think, as you know, we've moved beyond just apps, right? With things like global secure access, right?
Yes.
We now have resources that we manage access to, but they're just assignments, and we can govern those just the same. So your file shares, SSH,
Yeah, they don't
all
even need
those
to be on
things.
Entra for
Exactly. Yeah.
them to work. Nice.
Yeah.
So let's talk about one of the big things that happened was the identity governance license didn't exist, and then it became, and there was Entra ID P1, P2 before, and a lot of people are not clear about like all of that shifts and what happened. How are these licensing, and how are the identity governance features, related?
Great question. So for those who are not familiar with Entra licensing, we have what's called the free edition, right? This is all editions of Entra have these capabilities. And then we actually have some additional features, premium features called Entra ID Premium 1. And then later we added Entra ID Premium 2. And that's where the IGA features really started showing up in the Entra platform. So, we have these core capabilities of entitlement management, access reviews, privileged identity management. These are very commonly deployed with customers. But customers actually wanted more, right? They said, well, you know what? I have more needs for IGA and governance. And that's when we started bringing advanced capabilities. And that's when we introduced the Entra ID Governance SKU, which adds some new core capabilities, but also adds some discrete features to what was existing core capabilities. So an example, right? Entitlement management is an Entra ID P2, right? That core request-based approval assignment engine that exists. But then in order to scale, right, as customers wanted to govern more, we brought things like automatic assignments to access packages. That's an Entra ID governance. We brought the extensibility of not just having assignments to these access packages, but the ability to have events on that when access is requested, assigned, approved, removed, call this workflow. So being able to take that automation one step further to do more complex governance scenarios on top of the core capabilities that already exist. Now, when we start adding more capabilities and, of course, more license SKUs, there's a little bit of confusion. And I have to say that I understand that I can definitely relate to
Yes.
customers because the names sound the same. When I'm talking to a customer about entitlement management and I'm quickly talking about the features, how do they know what is in one license level with the next, right?
Yes.
So it actually was it was a conversation I was having with the team. I said, you know what, we need to be clear on this. And I actually charted out in our internal docs, this features in Entra ID P2, this features in Entra ID governance. And I said, you know what? Customers need this. So we actually work with our document team to publish that table you might have now that defines what discrete capability in the IGA space and what license level it belongs into.
Nice. Yeah, that's one I point people to all the time, because there are so many things where you shift from one to the other, and even to know what are you really getting with identity governance. When you compare with P2, it's a lot clearer about
Yes.
one is like a full blown product versus some of the basic functionality that you have with the premium to the pre to license.
And to add some more confusion, so customers see the value of Entra ID governance and they want it for their employees. And that's something they can purchase and buy licenses for. But as we expanded the governance to external users, there was some confusion of how do you license for external users, right?
Yes.
So we announced the new external user model of how do you actually analyze the usage of governance features by external users and actually how is that built, right? So recently there's a lot of updated documentation on how we actually define what is a governed action for guests. And if you weren't aware, maybe you're not, we actually log in the audit log when that governed action is in that governed guest scenario. So now you can write reports and look at all the guests which are using governed activities that month. So we're making it, I feel, much easier for an admin to look at what am I governing, what are the user population, to highlight are there gaps, but also to plan about their licensing needs as well.
Nice. So tell us about the future. What trends are you seeing that's shaping, the future of identity governance?
So you might have heard of this thing called AI. I know it's not a term you may hear very often.
Yes. And Copilot.
And Copilot, yeah. But AI and governance really has an interesting story, right? So I feel AI is actually going to drive the need for more governance. And why is that, right? I mean, for those of us who are using Copilot and other third-party agents and all that, these AI act on our behalf of, we may ask or prompt it to go do something or get some information. Well, in an organization, right, it's going to use the access to the information we have, even if we don't know we have access to it, right? So, you're going to ask AI, what is the sales forecast for the next 3 months? And all of a sudden, it's telling you about these new products or new projects that you never heard of before. And that's because you were never removed from some sales project long ago, but the AI was able to access it. So it's actually surfacing that information, right? So being aware of not just the access a user thinks they has, but how an AI can utilize the access that's been legitimately granted, even though it may not be appropriate, will be very important to bring more governance to it. But then how do we utilize AI to drive more governance, right? So if we can use AI to discover applications and access, or the access it has, well, maybe we can utilize those tools to sort of map out the environment and help determine when access is appropriate and when it should be reviewed or removed or these kind of things. So I could see a lot of the AI driving governance, but also governance being enabled by AI to be more accessible to end users and to be more efficient.
Nice, nice. And Microsoft introduced Agent ID as well, right? So
Yes.
there's going to be agents having the identity as well. And I'm sure that's going to be an interesting thing that's going to come up when you talk about identity governance.
Exactly. It's not just the people personas, but the agents that act on behalf of that person and the tasks or items that they have to access. So how do you get the appropriate governance when it's Jeff or it's an agent acting on behalf of Jeff, right? Having those right controls for the right access for the right persona is going to become so important. And we want to enable the tools on the Entra platform and the Microsoft platform to help organizations handle that.
Nice. Yeah, it's an exciting time
And I don't want to
in the
scare
space.
people for sure.
Yeah.
Exciting is the word. It's going to enable the business, but as admins and stewards of security and making sure the business is secure, we have to be thinking of these things now.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Cool. Awesome. Jeff, it's been such a fascinating talk with you. Time just flew talking
I
about identity
did.
governance.
Yeah.
And
It
yeah, and
always does.
with you, it's really hard to pin a topic because you know so much about Entra from all the different things. So we just picked identity governance for this chat. But I'm sure we're going to have more discussions with you
Oh, of
on
course.
you're such a wealth of knowledge. And for me, like everything, when I came in, I joined this team, I was like, I need to be more like Jeff.
Oh,
And
no.
that was my you were my inspiration to be a
Well,
better product manager.
Well, I appreciate you pulling in the community, making aware, because I think it really does help customers understand the technology, but how it applies to them, and getting that feedback into our product cycles is always important. So thank you.
Yes, yeah, it's a fun thing to do. Cool, awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mario. Great talking to you.